The relationship between China and the United States experienced a drastic change in the 1970s. Initially motivated by a common fear of the Soviet Union, China and the United States ended 20 years long adversaries and non-communication and opened a new era of collaboration and opportunities. The establishment of People's Republic of China in 1949 marked the end of Chinese Civil War since 1946, and the communists come to power in mainland China. The KMT, supported by the United States during the Civil War, retreated to the islands of Taiwan. There were no signs of reconciliation, and both sides claimed themselves the sole legitimate government of China. The United States continued to support the KMT government, and Red China chose to side with the Soviet Union. The cost of being hostile to the US was the blockade from all its allies. China lost almost all political and economic ties with the Western countries. This was temporarily offset by the huge aid from the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union agreed to loan $300 million to $600 million to China every year. In the 1950 Sino-Soviet Treaty, and sent thousands of experts to China to help it finish its first 5 years plan. During the Korean War from 1950 to 1953, China dispatched a voluntary army to fight the US Army on the Korean Peninsula. China also sent aid and several thousand personnel to aid northern Vietnam against the French and the Americans. Without formally declaring war, the Sino-American relationship had fallen to ice point. However, the Sino-Soviet relationship deteriorated started in late 1950s, when Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev criticized Stalinism and tried to control China's military. A series of ideological, political, and territorial conflicts rose between China and the Soviet Union. The Soviet aids were cut off. The Sino-Soviet relationship reached its worst when small-scale armed conflicts took place on Sino-Soviet border in 1969. Both China and the Soviet Union had heavy military deployment on the border. Moscow even considered a primitive nuclear strike, and China now seeing the USSR as its greatest security threat. On the other hand, the Cold War between the United States and the USSR escalated after the Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962. The US then engaged in a costing war with North Vietnam. In short term, getting closer to China would encourage Hanzhe to make a deal with the United States. According to Winston Lord, National Security Council staffer and later US ambassador to China. In long term, it is simply unwise to alienate such a big country from the United States, according to Richard Nixon. The first sign of warming of the Sino-American relationship was ping-pong diplomacy, an encounter between American player Lin Cohen and Chinese player Zhang Zedong during the 1971 World Table Tennis Championships in Nagoya, Japan. In April 1971, a delegation of 7 American athletes was invited to visit China. The delegation became the first American delegation to step on Chinese soil since 1949. In July 1971, Nixon's National Security Advisor Henry Kissinger secretly visited China for a day and had conversations with Chinese Premier Zhou Enlai. This laid ground for President Nixon's visit to China in February 1972. Zhou Enlai, second figure of the Chinese government, waited Nixon in airport. Hours after arrival, Nixon met Mao Zedong, who was in poor health condition but insisted to see him. In the next days, Nixon and the American delegation was toured to several cultural, industrial, and historical sites of Beijing, Shanghai, and Hanzhe. Nixon also had 18 meetings with Zhou Enlai, their agreements made the Shanghai Communique, issued by the Chinese and the US government. The US expressed a commitment to withdraw its troops from Vietnam and acknowledged one China policy, that Taiwan is part of China and there's only one China. But China rejected the US proposal of establishing further security relationship to counter the USSR, said China is confident of defending itself.
This is a positive move in conformity with the desire of the Chinese and American peoples, and an event unprecedented in the history of the relations between China and the United States.
But what we have said in that communique is not nearly as important as what we will do in the years ahead to build a bridge across 16,000 miles and 22 years of hostility which have divided us in the past. And what we have said today is that we shall build that bridge.
Yet the contact between China and the US remained political in the purpose of restraining the Soviet Union, without much cultural or economic contact. Only authorized delegations and reporters were allowed to enter China. The second substantial change of the Sino-American relationship came with the end of the Great Cultural Revolution. The Great Cultural Revolution started in 1966, aimed to get the Chinese society and culture rid of all traditional and capitalist elements, greatly damaged the Chinese economy. After the death of Mao Zedong and the end of the movement in 1976, China's new leader, Deng Xiaoping, decided to gradually marketize the Chinese economy and open China to foreign investment. American enterprises like Coca-Cola started to enter China. China started importing American technologies and sending students to American universities. The new changes in China promoted the formal establishment of diplomatic relationships between China and the United States on January 1, 1979. In the joint communique, the US repeated its acknowledgement of one China policy and added that the People's Republic of China is the only legitimate government of China. China acknowledged that the American people would continue their commercial, cultural, and other unofficial contacts with the people of Taiwan. The formal establishment of the diplomatic relationship, along with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and Vietnamese invasion of Cambodia, promoted further military cooperation between the US and China. 1979 marked the beginning of Sino-American relationship honeymoon that would last all the way throughout 1980s. The dramatic development of the Sino-American relationship in the 1970s could not be viewed as an isolated event. It was part of the greatest scene of the Cold War, the contest between communism and capitalism. At the beginning of the Cold War, when communist parties took power in several Asian countries, including China, the Americans thought they were internally turned to be the enemies of the United States and would dedicate all their strength to the destruction of the capitalist world. This turned out not true as more conflicts broke out between the communist countries. China, as a communist country, even cooperated with the United States to counter the USSR. In late Cold War, substantial interest in self-ideology started to play greater roles in countries' decisions. Today, the annual worth of Sino-American trade has reached $615 billion, and this inseparable relationship will begin with the initial contacts made by ping-pong diplomacy in 1971.